And welcome back to Morning Shard. Ladies and gentlemen, as you will know, Cyril Ramaphosa says he's going to fix the country through infrastructural reform. He's currently trying to gain forms of infrastructure spending equivalent to 4.8 trillion rand. And in dollar perspective, that's $257 billion. The problem is that the actual supply chains which he needs in order to get this investment are currently all under threat. Noticeably, a steel manufacturer. Now, I previously covered this underneath a previous video, but the actual story has since developed, and it's actually pertinent for us to consider what's actually now going on. So the actual steel manufacturer is responsible for all of the goods that would be used in turning the country into an infrastructure site. The idea of a construction site country was first banded by Dean McPherson. The steel plant itself is also responsible for supplying many of the metal parts used by the automobile industry in the construction of vehicles. Should the company close, many of the goods needed to turn the country into a construction site and many of the goods needed for the automobile plants would cease to be provided, which would cause difficulties from all parties and individuals involved in the supply chain. So what is the potential outcome of this? Well, let's use an example. So Rand York Castings basically says that if it were to have to import many of the raw materials that it would need to create its products and not source them locally, it would move its plant to India. Now, why would that be the case? Well, first we have to understand what caused the problems. So the problems in the first place were caused by the failing freight rail infrastructure. It was also being caused by high electricity prices and low growth, as well as government policy. It's always government policy. What exactly is the local government policy that's caused problems? Well, this specifically comes down to the scrap metal industry. For those of you who haven't noticed, many people go around the country cutting down parts of our infrastructure, such as the light poles, traffic lights, and so forth, in order to steal the copper. We've all seen the looting of the train stations and so forth. A lot of that scrap metal makes its way to scrap metal dealers, and those dealers will melt the metal down and then ship it through to certain manufacturers. Problem is that the metal itself is not actually tested or certified, which means that the actual metal itself can't be used for many of the key components manufacture that many of the industries would require. However, by flooding the market with cheap metal or cheap steel, what this effectively does is it makes it very difficult for the larger manufacturers to provide certified steel that can be used for the purposes of construction and to a large degree manufacture. Another fundamental issue that you would inevitably have is that if you were to order your steel or your parts, because as I've said in a previous video, many of these companies are basically saying they're not going to import the steel and then manufacture the items here. It's cheaper for them just to import the manufactured item from abroad. Now, if they do that, the problem is that there is, in the first instance, a net outflow of capital. In other words, capital has to be sent abroad in order to buy the parts. There's also then a severe delay in getting the part into the country. We all know the problems in Transnet and what that would mean in terms of products coming into the country. Those delays mean that many of these manufacturers are basically saying it's not worth manufacturing here because they don't have the speed required in order to get the goods to market. Parties themselves who have said that they're very unhappy with this are actually VW and Toyota, two of the largest car manufacturers in the country. Both of them say that should the plant close, it would take them at least 12 months to source a new supplier. They also argue that because there would be many tool manufacturers and tool makers that would effectively cease to work, many of them may seek greener pastures abroad, which would lead to the skill immigrating from the country. So why has this all happened? Well, AMSA basically says that the fundamental reason for all of this happening in the first place is because of a frosty relationship between the government and the steel manufacturer. They basically say the steel manufacturer has been arguing with the government over some time over them actually doing something around the scrap metal industry and also around other policy issues. such as the decline in the freight industry. According to them, government's been able to do something about this for some time, and they were flatly ignored by the government at many occasions. So, if you were an ANC member, we've heard many ANC members go on record and say, well, we'll just replace him. Will they replace him? Well, actually, many of their competitors, many of the manufacturers' competitors, have been approached to ask if they would expand investment in the country in order to create plants that could potentially provide an alternative source for steel. The answer is that they've all come back categorically and said that the local South African market is too small for them to consider investing in the country. In other words, Computer says no, they're really not interested in South Africa. Now that causes the industry a problem. Basically means that Ramaphosa says he wants an infrastructure boom, he wants a manufacturing boom, and the actual makers of the products that are needed for this boom were just leaving the country and closing shop. So what does the industry have to say? Well, the industry's had to say that in the event that this does occur, VW and Toyota, for example, say they're just going to have to shut shop because effectively they can't sit around for 12 months waiting for new suppliers to deliver goods. They've got cars to make, they've got deadlines to meet. So will it actually be resolved? Well, according to industry, no, it won't. Apparently they're too far down the line. They say they understand that the Minister of Trade, Parks, is engaged in all these conversations, but let's face it, it's just too late. Now, why this article is actually really interesting is because in the same day, the Finance Minister, Godongwana, basically says that South Africa will regain its investment grade within the next 2 years. He says that by 2027, we'll actually have our investment grade back, which could see net inflows of capital. But the problem is that he very well says at the convention in Davos that he understands that this would only be dependent on there being economic growth in the country. Now, research done by Business Unity South Africa says that if key reforms were done in Eskom, Transnet, and if the private sector were able to be successfully mobilized for forms of investment, that we could see 3% economic growth in the country. We all know that the problems in the country can easily be fixed with the right will and determination. But the problem is there isn't the right will and determination. In fact, as you all know, 2 days ago I covered Parks' plan to basically provide another 3% taxation on businesses for the purpose of a transformation fund. Now, the DA has since come out and said that it would not support, quote unquote, this madness. They further on went to say that they would not support any effort which seeks to undermine the rule of law and jeopardize the competitiveness of the economy. So basically they're saying they're not going to support this. So why do they consider it to be a breach of the rule of law? And I suppose what they're doing is they're applying the same judicial ruling that was given during COVID to the tourism grant. The idea that we're supposed to have this non-racial society. But at the end of the day, whether or not it gets passed is immaterial, because what it shows you is the same contempt at which the private industry is always held toward. It always provides more, and we will give you less. We will make the environment unsufferable for you, we'll make it difficult for you to do business, and in return, we'll tax you, and we'll put demands on you, and we'll make the ability to make profits almost impossible. This, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, is the South African government's way. But anyway, that's just my views. You can let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.